up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today I'm going to be doing something just a little bit different. I want to put a disclaimer, okay, because I stopped covering true crime because I felt like if I didn't reach out to the families or the victim, it was going to be really offensive, and I did have some problems. But I just want everyone to know my intention is not to spread misinformation or gossip or anything like that. This is a story of survival that needs to be told. If anybody from the family or if the victim is watching and they have any issue with anything, just email me, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Please don't attack me in the comments. I am only trying to spread awareness and hope and love. And I think this case, I don't even cover true crime, but I came across it and I was like, I have to tell this woman's story, even though it's not really mine to tell. So I mean, no disrespect. And with all that being said, let's move on. I want to remind you guys that I never hide the fact that I'm in recovery, and I say it all the time and talk about it in hopes that it'll help people understand that we are not always that shady character waiting for you to leave so we can rob your house. A lot, if not most of us, experiment when we're young and we get through it relatively unharmed. So let's not have any shaming, blaming, or any of that in the comments. I feel like I shouldn't even have to say this, but there's always that one or two people who've never been there, and because of that, they think they're better or somehow above the rest of us who have. If you're looking for a reaction, you won't get it here, because if you put something like that, shaming, judgmental comments, you'll just be deleted immediately and you'll be removed from the channel. As I said, I don't really cover true crime anymore, but this one was just too horrific for me to overlook. I'm just going to jump right in with the shocking and heartbreaking and almost unbelievable case of Amber Smith. At the time this attack happened, Amber Smith was 20 years old. She lived in Fort Collins, Colorado, and had a 3-year-old son who lived with her named Gabriel. Like I said, Amber didn't make a lot of the right choices. Like a lot of us in our teenage years, you know, we don't have the mental capacity to make smart decisions a lot of the time. She was hanging with the wrong crowd and partying and just kind of being irresponsible, as teenagers and young adults oftentimes will be. After she and her son's father split up, though, she decided she wanted to turn a new leaf and really get her life together. She wanted to give something better to her son. She got her high school equivalency and got a job where she could at the 7-Eleven. She was doing anything and everything she could to stick to her newly formed goals in life. She was a single mom now and really started taking that role really seriously. She had a ton of friends, she was beautiful, and she was described as just really fun. Someone everyone loved to be around and who loved to be around others. So with all that being said, let's get to the night of the attack, because this is a long story. There's so much to cover, and it's really important to me that I give you guys as much detail starting from when it all happened and going on. So even though Amber turned this new leaf, she was 20 years old. She was still out. She was still partying every once in a while. And, you know, addiction is addiction. So maybe she had a little bit of alcoholism there. I don't know. I'm not trying to diagnose her. But on August 31st, 2013, right there in the town of Fort Collins, a police officer was on duty at around 4:30 in the morning. His name was Dane Stratton. He had gotten information from the 911 dispatch that a woman had called in screaming and crying and basically unintelligible in a neighborhood park. It wasn't just the one phone call from the girl to 911 though. Various and multiple residents who were neighbors with the park were calling in and reporting hearing a woman screaming from inside, around, or near the park. So of course, Officer Stratton rushes to the park to see what's going on. He didn't have to wait long to see something was majorly wrong. As he pulled up, he saw a young woman lying on the concrete sidewalk wearing nothing but one sock. This young woman was alive but covered in so many injuries. She had been bound with red duct taped over her entire face, and her hands were also duct taped behind her back. She had obviously been severely beaten. Officer Stratton called for more officers and also the paramedics, and they all shortly arrived to back him up and render help to the young woman. When she was brought to the hospital, it was determined that the young girl's name was Amber Smith, and she also, unfortunately, had been sexually assaulted. Take that as your trigger warning. She suffered multiple other very serious wounds, like a broken jaw. One of her eyes was actually swollen shut, and the other one was almost swollen completely shut, and she even had bleeding in her brain. She was severely beaten. She had ligature marks all over her neck, too. Amber began telling the detective everything she could remember, which was some, but unfortunately the name of her attacker or attackers completely eluded her. She recalled that she had started her night about 1.5 miles away from where she was found. She started at a place called Cotton Glen Park, but they found her 1.5 miles away at a park named Rossboro. She admitted she had been drinking with a male friend named Eric, but that she had too much vodka and she passed out right there in the park. Her male friend must have left her there passed out on the bench like she was. She said the next thing she remembered were parts of the attack. Upon waking up, she said she immediately knew she was in danger but couldn't look around the room or where she was at all. When she tried to make noise or scream, she was hit over the head and knocked back out. She woke up again. This time her eyes and entire face also were taped shut, and she was completely naked at this point. She could hear cars in the distance and stated, quote, "I knew I was alive at that point. I knew I had to get out of there. So I gave it all my might to scream through the duct tape," end quote. This was all she could remember. Authorities had collected a DNA sample from the scene and felt very strongly that the perpetrator would already be in the system due to how heinous the crime was. However, this was not the case. Over the next 4 years, they tried their best to find the attacker. They collected a DNA sample and started their investigation with the man Amber was originally with that night, the guy named Eric. The investigators felt like the attack was far too brutal to have been random, and it seemed personal in its violence. I mean, this is kind of terrifying in that the police thought it was someone she knew who had done this to her, but she had no memory of who it was or even who it could possibly be. That means it literally could have been anyone, and this was just unimaginably scary for this young woman, as I'm sure we could all imagine. So Eric was the first person on the list of people of interest, and they tracked him down. He was 20 years old. He lived with his parents. It was at his parents' house where the police knocked and his mother answered, and she told the investigators that Eric wasn't there. He was at church where he regularly volunteered. The authorities went to the church, and Eric didn't seem the least bit surprised that they wanted to speak with him about something happening to Amber. They looked at it like he either knew this because, 1, he was the one who did it, or 2, he knew because they had all had the same friends, and the grapevine news travels really fast. So he wasn't really surprised that it was about her. Eric then took the police through his version of events on the night of August 31st. It was pretty much the same as what Amber had told him about what she remembered. He said that after she had passed out, he left her there after repeatedly trying to wake her up, and he couldn't. He left her to sleep it off, but a few blocks away while he was headed home, guilt started to kick in, and he was worried something had happened to her with the state she was in if he just left her there alone, passed out on the park bench in the middle of the night. He claims that he turned around and went back to give Amber a ride home, but when he got there, she was awake and responsive. He claimed she insisted she would be okay and didn't want to go home. He said when he left, she was up and even walking and pretty much coherent, so he left her again, and this time he just went home. Do I personally believe him? Yes. That's just my opinion that he went back. I mean, you'll see why, like, we know that this actually happened, but did he go back and check on her? I do believe it. I'd like to think people, even when drunk and making bad decisions, are better than this. To just leave a 20-year-old inebriated female who you consider a friend just lying passed out drunk on a public bench in an open park in the middle of the night. Call me old-fashioned or gullible, but yes, I believe Eric did it, and I believe he had his reasons. We don't have to agree on whether this was being a good friend or not, because I'm not saying this was a good move or being a good friend or a good choice. I'm simply saying I do personally believe he went back. I probably just made that way more complicated than it had to be, but that's what I do. I'm sure we can all agree that doing this, though, doesn't automatically make him guilty of the brutality and horror that happened to her next. So I'll just move on. The authorities took his DNA sample and waited for the results to come back. It was really all they could do. In all honesty, the police didn't believe Eric had left her there at all, and in fact thought it highly likely that the DNA that they had collected at the scene would be a match, and Eric would end up being the perpetrator of the crimes against her. Everything I just reported to you happened very quickly and within the first 13 hours since finding Amber left basically for dead in the park. After speaking to Eric, the authorities went back to Amber to question her again to see if she had since remembered anything else about the assault and the attack. She had remembered more, and what she did remember is just so freaking chilling. This is why I felt I just had to tell her story. She had no idea how long she had been there on the bench after Eric had left. She remembered that after he left for the second time, she laid back down on the bench and passed back out. When she woke up, she was lying on her stomach and wasn't outside anymore at all, let alone in the park, in Cotton Glen Park. Whoever had done these things to her had not done them out in the open in the park, but had brought her inside, most likely to a house somewhere. This is when she realized, as I mentioned earlier, that she was duct taped and began screaming through the tape and got knocked out by her attacker or attackers. This is where the ligature marks came into play, because as she succeeded to scream a bit through the duct tape, she was actually strangled with a ligature around her neck from behind and choked back unconscious. She obviously wasn't able to see anything, but she knew it was dark and no lights were on. had she been able to catch a glimpse through the duct tape, which she didn't. So whoever did this to her abducted her from one park, brought her to a residence of some sort, assaulted and beat her, then strangled her unconscious and brought her back outside, put her in a vehicle, transported her to a different park 1.5 miles away from where she was originally passed out, left by her so-called friend, and eventually abducted from. Amber lived in fear and was forever changed, as I'm sure you guys can imagine. With whoever did this to her still on the loose, she wondered if they were going to find her and come and finish the job. Did they know they were leaving her alive when they dropped her back off? She didn't know, and maybe they had thought they had strangled her to death and were dumping a dead body. Amber said that if anyone looked at her for more than a split second or two, she would just start to think that maybe they were the attacker and knew she was on to them. I can't even imagine the emotional toil and mental turmoil and probable torture this would instill in me had I been in Amber's situation. My heart aches for and really goes out to her. I'm positive I have passed out more than once on a bench or a lawn or in a hallway somewhere drunk and incoherent and left by someone or another who didn't want to deal with me anymore or who just wanted to go home themselves. Luckily for me, I escaped unharmed, and I am in no way, shape, or form condoning this or saying I'm proud of it. I'm just saying I'm careful not to judge Amber too harshly here and choose instead to show sympathy and grace. She was suspicious of anyone and everyone she came into contact with, and upon being released from the hospital, Amber was placed into protective custody, as I'm sure the fact she survived and there was a very active investigation didn't escape the attention of the police. I'm sure they knew full well what could happen to her if her attacker managed to get to her. Remember, they fully believed it was someone Amber not only knew, but who she was close to. The investigators thought for sure the case would be closed quickly because if it wasn't Eric, whose DNA had already been being tested in the lab, then surely it would be someone whose DNA was in the system already. They thought it was impossible that whoever did this was a first-time offender whose DNA wouldn't be in the system. They were running it through CODIS, which stands for, if you don't already know, the Combined DNA Index System, and it's the generic term used to describe the FBI's program of support for criminal justice DNA databases, as well as the software used to run these databases. Whenever someone commits a felony crime, they have to submit their DNA to the authorities, and it's held in the CODIS system, mainly so that if they commit a crime again, the investigation process is that much easier. So if the person who did this to Amber had committed a felony before, their DNA would be in there, and whether stranger or someone close, they would be caught quickly due to the DNA evidence. Many people who commit sexual assaults, especially ones this violent and brutal, are not first-time offenders. I mean, yeah, like everyone commits their first crime once, but again, that's why it's taken for the first time. All subsequent crimes they've committed will be solved or the more quickly to get them off the streets. I'm not sure if I'm really explaining this correctly, but I'm pretty sure most of you all know what I'm talking about anyway, so I'm going to move on. They thought that this case would be solved quickly due to the brutality, as I said, and we're just waiting for a match to the DNA they collected off of Amber's body and the duct tape at the hospital. About a week after the initial attack, the DNA results came back, and to the shock of the investigators, it didn't match either Eric or anyone else in the CODIS system. So basically, the attacker's DNA wasn't in the database. This meant either it was actually their first time or they hadn't ever gotten caught before and therefore never had to give their DNA, so it wasn't in the system. So this completely cleared Eric. The investigation was completely back at square one and started to go cold almost immediately as there was nowhere else for it to go without a DNA match. After a few years, Amber had come to the realization that this case may never be solved. It had been years and the case was so cold. There were no new leads and the authorities didn't know where to go from there. They just had nowhere to go. Amber started to feel like it was her fault and maybe that's why it wasn't being solved, kind of like on a karmic level, I think. She felt that maybe had she not been so intoxicated as to be passed out in the middle of the night on a park bench, it wouldn't have happened to her. This is a bunch of bullshit and I'm so sorry she was made to feel this way, even if it was by her own guilt that did it. In 2015, Amber was ready to strike out on her own again and start picking up the pieces. She didn't want to live in fear anymore and decided to share a house with a few roommates. She was still in Fort Collins, but was trying to move on with her life and make a fresh start again. Maybe by living with new people and not living in fear all the time, she could begin to move forward. She was living with friends. The neighborhood was known to be safe, so she felt really good and optimistic about her future. She moved in with her friends named Bryce Bailey and Stefan Moon, who everyone called Sam. There were a few females in the house too that Amber was friends with. The closest person to Amber in the house was Sam, though. At first, she didn't know him as well as she knew the others, but once they opened up to each other after living together, they became really tight, and Amber told him all about what she had been through, what she had survived. This was a little surprising, even to Amber, that she opened up so much to Sam, because she thought in the beginning that he didn't like her very much. She knew him kind of the least out of everyone, but he was friends with her friends, and that's how they ended up being roommates. She said he would give her dirty looks and everything, but it could have just been she was used to people looking at her strange after everything she had been through. Like when she would look at someone, she would think they were looking at her funny, especially people she didn't know all too well. However, once they started living together and spent some time together, Sam and Amber got super duper tight. He became her main support system and cheerleader, and even her confidant, and she became that for him as well. Amber's family and friends said they noticed a really good change in Amber after she moved into this new house and started branching out with these new roommates and making new friends. She was more relaxed, and just her overall well-being was really more bright than it had been since the night when her whole life changed back in August 2 years earlier. She seemed ready to move on and very happy. Another thing, and I think I mentioned this already, is that Amber kind of came to terms with the fact that this case would most likely never be solved, and it was just something she was going to have to live with either way. She was tired of thinking about it and just wanted to move forward. She stayed living with these friends and worked towards recovery and picking up the pieces until the next part of this case, which happened 4 years after the initial attack in 2017. Amber was living on her own by this point and had moved out of the shared home with her friends, but she'd stayed in contact with all of them, especially Sam. So what happened was her ex-roommate Bryce's bike had gotten stolen, and he decided to call the police and report it as such. The police very quickly figured out that the bike had been sold to a pawn shop in Colorado, and I don't think it's like this in any other state. It's not like this in all states, I know that, but it's actually considered a felony to provide false information to a pawnbroker. So, selling stolen merchandise while obviously not telling the pawnbroker it's stolen merchandise made this a felony case. A stolen bicycle became a felony. I'm just going to move on and not even get into that. The suspect used his own name, though, and the broker provided his name to the police, and very quickly the stolen bicycle caper was solved. They had the person's real name and address, and somehow, and this is unclear to me still, but possibly through the pawnbroker handing over documents the guy touched, or I don't know. I don't know how it happened, but they got his DNA. I wonder, too, if they had gotten this information, arrested him, took his DNA, and he made bail, which was more likely in my opinion. But again, I'm not 100% sure how they got the person who stole the bicycle's DNA. Well, as is usually the case when someone's DNA is taken from them for committing a felony, it's entered into CODIS to be stored. Also, though, it's run against any and all open case DNA to see if it's a match. It was. The person who stole Bryce's bicycle's DNA actually ended up being a match for the person who attacked and nearly killed Amber Smith 4 years earlier. Of course, when the lab called the detectives, everyone was elated and couldn't believe their good luck. After everything, a stolen freaking bicycle is what ended up solving this case for Amber. The police, of course, called Amber and asked if they could come and speak to her, that they had made an arrest and the person's DNA matched that of the person in her case. Amber was really surprised, but obviously elated too, that maybe this nightmare would finally be over and she would be able to face her attacker, this time a grown woman who had survived and endured so much because of him. The shock of this must have been nothing, though, compared to what came next. They sat her down and showed her a picture of the man who attacked her and had seemingly coincidentally just happened to have stolen her ex-roommate's bicycle 4 years later. Upon seeing the picture of the man in question, Amber was horrified to see the face. In fact, it was someone she knew. The person who stole Bryce's bike and attacked Amber and left her for dead was none other than the person who would since become one of her closest friends and confidants, Sam Moon. He had sat there on numerous occasions and even provided her with comfort as she raged and cried and trusted him enough to pour her heart out about the horror she had faced and survived. I want to keep reiterating that she survived because in my opinion, there's a special place in hell for somebody like Sam Moon. He was seemingly so supportive and kind and helped take care of her as best he could when she would break down to him. She trusted him. The detective somehow managed to calm Amber down and convince her to call Sam on the spot right in front of them. Sam answered and the call began just as normally as any other the two had had since bonding with them, catching up and chit-chatting, all that stuff. It had been a while since they had spoken, since they didn't live together anymore, but after a few minutes, Amber got right down to business. She told him straight out that the DNA found from her attack matched his DNA. He was almost as shocked as she was that she was confronting him with this, I guess, because he responded to this by saying, quote, "What? Oh my God, Amber, I don't know what to say. I did not hurt you, end quote. He was stumbling over his words. He continued sputtering and stammering and was really just speechless. He was trying to tell her it was all a mistake and he didn't understand how this could happen. He was asking why it happened and all this bullshit, right? His denials just kept going on, and it was actually, I'm sure, quite pathetic. And quite hilarious, in my opinion, too. I can't even imagine the sweet justice of listening to this for Amber. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying she was happy or anything. I'm just saying that probably her relief was made not so much by the confusion and all of these feelings I can't even name because I would have no clue about them or what she was possibly feeling and going through in that moment. Finally, after a little while, the authorities said it was clear that this coward was not going to confess, and it was becoming a waste of time to continue to try and get him to admit it. Right before they were going to end the conversation, though, Sam said, quote, "Oh, it was you at Rossborough Park, right?" End quote. And Amber said, quote, "Yes, it was me at Rossborough Park," end quote. So I didn't understand this at first, but then I realized he was thinking about the DNA and the implications and decided to place himself at the scene, but in a different way. I'm still really confused at this point, guys, so I don't know. What I do know is after this was confirmed, he changed his entire story. So he goes on to tell her that they had sex that night at the park, but that he isn't the one who attacked her. He claimed right on this phone call and right to her that he had responded to a Craigslist ad that she had put up that night where he says she was offering free oral sex in Rossborough Park, and he just responded to that. Just a guy, right? Oh my God, the actual balls on this guy. He says that this is how the two of them met and why the DNA was on her, this Craigslist ad that she allegedly posted. He then hung up the phone on her. Amber said of this claim about the Craigslist ad that it was, quote, "disgusting, embarrassing, and downright false," end quote. The DNA was enough, though, and the police went and arrested him. He stuck to his same claims about the ads and the oral sex, and he said he had never brought it up to her because he had never seen the girl in the park's face. He claimed that after this park hookup, he went home and told his roommate at the time, who just happened to be Bryce Bailey, about the girl in the park who was handing out free oral sex. He said Bryce went and met the girl in the park himself after hearing Sam talk about her, but an hour later, Bryce returned to the house with the girl, but kept claiming he still hadn't seen her face as they were in different rooms the entire time. Remember, he's still saying that even with her at his house, he only responded to the ad, and that was it. Oh my God, with this guy. He said Bryce took the girl upstairs and all he heard was yelling, screaming, crying, and banging, but never went to investigate what was happening at all. So not only is this a huge insult added to an even bigger injury on Amber, this all started with his DNA being found and hit on because he stole Bryce's bicycle. So now he's trying to pin the whole thing on this other guy too. Sam said after the screaming and crying had stopped, he somehow just knew that Bryce had murdered the random girl he had just brought back to his room from the park. Oh my God, I can't even keep up with it all. It's literally exhausting me right now. The idiocy and the balls on this guy. He looked underneath his door after the noise quieted down and saw Bryce carrying the girl over his shoulder down the stairs and out of the house. He saw all of this from peering under a crack in his door. He said when he asked Bryce about it the very next day, Bryce beat the shit out of him and threatened him not to ever mention it again or say anything. So he was like, all right then, and never brought it up and never went to the authorities because he didn't want to get beat up or killed again. I think it worth mentioning here that Sam's DNA was all over Amber, the duct tape, the crime scene, and Bryce's DNA was nowhere on her at all. Upon further investigation, while speaking to Sam's parents, the police found that the parents did remember having a roll of red duct tape a while back from when they were being questioned about this, but they said they remember it just not being in there anymore someday. I mean, red duct tape is kind of uncommon. It's probably something you'd remember, at least where I'm from. So I could see how they would remember having something like that and it disappearing very suddenly. It isn't a regular silver roll of duct tape we're talking about, you know? Sam's parents described him as smart and bright while growing up, but that he didn't make the best decisions. At one point, they even referred to him as, quote, a screw-up, end quote. They said he was, quote, famous, end quote, for doing dumb things that didn't make much sense. They said that regardless of the fact they were stupid things that he had done, he was never violent, aggressive, or particularly angry. His mother was dumbfounded when hearing what he was being accused of and had a hard time believing it. She insists she taught him better with how to respect women and how to treat them in general. The detectives, of course, had to bring in Bryce Bailey because he was now being accused of the crime by Sam, and they were roommates at the time of the assault and attack on Amber had happened. Bryce said he had no connection to what happened to Amber and also that he had no idea that Sam was involved or that he'd done it. He believed Sam was pinning it all on him as an act of revenge for getting him in trouble with the bicycle theft. Bryce said he had known Sam since they were 5 and that Sam was a habitual liar who believed himself most of the time. Of course, and quite obviously, in my opinion, the Craigslist ad angle was investigated and it didn't exist. Bryce gave his DNA up in multiple samples and it was confirmed he had no connection to the attack whatsoever. During trial, Sam said that the Craigslist ad did in fact exist and that the police rushed through trying to find it. So essentially he's saying they didn't look enough for it to see if they could find it. He proclaimed his innocence still. Amber took the stand and was once and for all and for the first time able to face her attacker, knowing it was her attacker, to face Sam, whom she had trusted and depended on as her attacker for the first time. She recounted everything she could remember and everything she had been through since the night it all happened. It took the jury less than 24 hours to find Stefan Sam Moon on the charge of first-degree attempted murder not guilty. I let that sink in. Not guilty. Attempted murder, not guilty. There were other charges, though, and he was found guilty for kidnapping and sexual assault and sentenced to 128 years in prison. So whether or not he attempted to kill her, he still is never going to see the light of day outside of a prison cage. So I find what this guy did particularly egregious and heinous. Living with her, befriending her, he had to have known it was her when he sat all those nights recounting her pain and horror to him. Amber said on the stand, quote, "I am angry, upset, and sad. So many things. But one thing I'll never be is Stefan Moon's victim. I'm broken, but I am stronger than I've ever been," end quote. You go, girl, and good for you. Guys, that's all I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was interesting for you. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed spending this time with me, if you enjoyed the content, if you just want to make me happy. Subscribe if you aren't already. If you are subscribed, please make sure your notification bell is turned on. Spread the love by sharing this video. Guys, thank you so much for all the emails. If you have any encounters with the supernatural and or paranormal and you want them to be in my listener encounters series, please email me at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. If you would like a personal reading for donation or free, also email me GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. In the description box, you will find links for PayPal, Patreon, Cash App, Amazon wishlist gift link if you want to make some kind of donation to the channel. Also in the description box, you'll find a link to one of my Wednesday night free one-card oracle readings. You come in, it starts at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time and goes till 10:45, 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Every single Wednesday, you come in, I put your name on a list, I pull a card. If you haven't been able to check it out live or go listen to it, listen to the link because you'll get the message that you need. It's a really, really fun time. We have a lot of really awesome people in there. Also, I'm going to put links for my book, the Kindle and paperback editions, Missing the Fae Theory by Gemma Jade, and you can find that on Amazon. If you want a signed copy, please hit me up through email or however before you make the purchase. Also, links to my Saturday and Sunday night show on SOR, the after-hour show on Spaced Out Radio with me, Big Willy Townsend, and the fedora-wearing John Hudson, where we talk everything woo. All right, let's get it done, guys. Go on over there and support Spaced Out Radio. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. You guys come and support me, come and see me, come and hang out with us. I love you guys. Be kind to each other. Be kind. It doesn't cost anything. It can make you feel so good. Smile at a stranger. Always go in grace. Have your best day. Have your best night. And I'll see you next time. Bye.